Tonight, on Friday Night with Byline Times, we have something rather special. A long and unique interview with the actor, director, and now author David Harewood about his new book and autobiography, Maybe I Don't Belong Here. It's an amazingly heartrending and insightful journey into the buried racial trauma of the 70s and 80s and the psychosis David experienced as a result. But it's also a hopeful story about recovery. And David has very graciously done special inserts for us, which you'll see throughout his interview with our editor, Hardeep Matharu, recalling some of those key incidents of a traumatic past. You should be aware strong language is used, and because of the nature of this material, it can be quite disturbing, but it's certainly worth a watch.
David Harewood is an actor, a documentary maker, and now an author. His new book, Maybe I Don't Belong Here, is a very personal look at his descent into psychosis and a stark examination of the impact of racism on mental health. On Byline Times over the past 2 years, we've been looking at all of these issues, race, identity, and the stoking of the divisive culture war. Who better to discuss all of these issues with than David Harewood himself? David, I was really excited at the prospect of your book because there's so much talk of identity politics, identity, culture wars, and very little digging down into what causes these challenges of identity within ourselves and what the consequences can be. You know, in your case, psychosis. The book is called Maybe I Don't Belong Here. And when you read it, that's a question that comes up again and again at the different points, which are quite different, you know, growing up in Birmingham, facing racist abuse to your face, RADA, you know, LA. I mean, is that question always going to be there? Do you feel now that you belong? Do you want to belong?
I think it's an ongoing question for me personally. I mean, I'm sure there's a sense of, there seems to be much more of a sense of a kind of sure-footed identity in the younger generation.
Yeah.
I still, for me, it's still, as I say, it's an ongoing question because so much of that, my history is sort of a traumatic one when it comes to that sense of belonging, particularly with the flag. And I've noticed that there's, you know, there are people who are really pushing for that flag to be present in every building, and you know, and you know, we are, you know, living through a time when our government is pushing these culture wars, which do make me feel slightly nervous, or that I don't feel like I don't belong. But I can see that that's not necessarily the case, say, with the younger generation. I'm still very inspired by, you know, the likes of Lewis Hamilton and, you know, crowd surfing with the Union Jack and Stormzy with his Union Jack vest. Their sense of identity is not the same as mine.
They've almost reclaimed the flag.
They've reclaimed it, and I think that's fantastic, you know, and I'm happy for them. But for me, you know, because they were, I would say, my formative years, and because I think growing up in the 70s, particularly the 70s, you know, under the National Front, the threat of the National Front, that flag, whenever I see it, is a sign of danger. And that's hard for me to shake.
You also say that there's echoes of, you know, a nationalist, populist sort of feeling again in the country. I mean, are you worried that some of the gains that have been made in terms of race and identity and will be reversed, particularly under this government, its politics?
I think there's no doubt that, you know, Brexit and nationalism, I think, definitely there was a resurgence of otherness and people saying, you know, fuck off back to your own country, where, you know, if you don't like it here, leave.
Wrapped up with sovereignty, right?
Yeah, and you know, I think it just means different things for different people. Nationalism means different things for different people, and you know, there are lots of people out there who I'm sure have been emboldened by it and feel that they're somehow reclaiming a sense of identity. But for a lot of other people, it was particularly those early days after Brexit was really worrying. You know, people, you know, I know lots of people who are racially abused, lots of black people who are racially abused in those days after that. We're coming for you lot.
Yeah.
You know, and I think you know, trying to explain that to others is surprisingly hard. You know, because they don't seem to accept that there's also a negative side to nationalism and populism, which is directly affects anybody who's been othered or anybody who doesn't necessarily fit into the white Anglo-Saxon Saxon print. For anybody who doesn't fit into that, they can be worrying times.
In Britain, we're still having debates about whether there's racism in the country. I mean, it always strikes me as extraordinary, the energy that has to go into just even fighting that, let alone any of the other things that, you know, the structural issues which we've seen play out in so many different ways. The coronavirus.
Yes, I know. Yes, yeah. It's enormously depressing, and I think it adds to the sort of mental angst that certainly I go through when I'm having conversations with people who say, "Well, it's not like that anymore. Get over it."
Yes.
You know, move past. It doesn't. It's fine. There's no such thing as racism. Or when the Seal report talks about the Caribbean experience.
Yeah.
I was horrified by that, and this sort of denialism, I think, contributes to a sense of I think I'm losing my mind because. The things I know to be true I'm being told that they don't exist. I'm being told that they're a myth, and yet I think those are the things that continually I think weigh on people of colour.
And it's not really discussed. I mean, your book is, and indeed the documentary, Psychosis and Me, that you did for the BBC, prior to that, really brought this subject, I would say, into the fore in a way that is not discussed. You know, how we are perceived, how we perceive ourselves, the gap between those things can really affect us. In the book, you speak about when you were 7 years old, and you had a confrontation with a man. Which affected...
He confronted me, I wouldn't call it a confrontation.
Yeah, he confronted you, and it just never left you, and you said that was the time when you felt that your identity split.
Yeah. I can remember as a child growing up in Birmingham, watching the television. My parents loved British sitcoms, and I always remember our house filled with the sound of laughter, and whether it was Love Thy Neighbour or Elaine Half Hot Mum, or Benny Hill, Morecambe and Wise. My favourite was Tommy Cooper. I just remember those idyllic times sitting by the fire listening to my parents laugh. And I think I took that very much with me out onto the street. And I was a bit of a clown as a kid. But all that sort of ended one day when I was sort of playing alone outside my house. And I think I was bouncing a ball, just sort of innocent, just thinking that I was a little English boy playing around. And I saw this elderly white gentleman across the road from me. And he sort of stopped and looked at me and started walking towards me. And I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel like he was charging at me. I was sort of watching this man just slowly get closer and closer. And he sort of got really quite close, and then he sort of leaned in to my face. His face was red and contorted and angry. And he said to me, "Get the fuck out of my country, you little black bastard." And stood there, glaring at me, and then stood up and walked away. And I sort of watched him walk away and thought, what did he mean? I was sort of puzzled by what he said. His country. I hadn't really understood the concept of the place where I was as a place that I didn't belong. But he said it was his country, not my country. And the clock started ticking, ticking, ticking. And then the bell went off. Maybe I don't belong here. And that's when I suddenly realized that maybe England wasn't supposed to be for me. And all these suddenly playful, idyllic ideas of being English sort of fell away, and I sort of split in two because, in a sense, that was the birth of my black consciousness, because I suddenly realised I was other, not English, but black. And it was a deeply uncomfortable moment. And one of the things that really stuck with me is I never said anything to anybody. Didn't tell my parents, didn't tell my friends, didn't tell my brothers or my sister. I just carried it with me.
It'd be interesting to explore a bit more about how that split happened, and to what extent is it all about assimilation? To what extent is it also, as a person of colour, parents who were, from different countries, born in Britain, how does one navigate not that feeling that you never quite fit anywhere?
That's a good question. I remember that moment like it was yesterday, and that, as you say, that split in my identity remains. And as I say, I think, as I say in the book, I've learnt to sort of build mental pathways now, and ways that sort of can pull these two things together. But it's always kind of two shifting tectonic plates for me. Sometimes I feel like I'm spinning, widely apart, like I did, during the Euros. I think the night of the semi-final, I was hopeful. I very nearly, put an England flag up. I very nearly had this sense that, if we win this,
with this team,
who've been principled in their sort of anti-racist stance, and I still get a sort of, say, a tear in my eye, but now when you hear players, when players take the knee, there's applause. And even that simple gesture, for me, is huge. It's almost as if some crowds have accepted what the gesture's about, understand what the gesture's about, and support it. Yes, it's anti-racist. Whereas at the start of the tournament, boos were ringing out.
Yeah.
And it was hurtful, because I was thinking, you're not listening, you're not getting it.
Indeed, the Home Secretary had said it was gesture politics.
It was extraordinary that, it's particularly when she said they have every right to boo. I think it was our Prime Minister said they have every right. I was just beside myself that they weren't understanding why they were doing it. And I think, Gareth put that wonderful piece out in the paper, explaining very calmly, why they were doing it, what it was about. Over that course of the tournament, the boos got less and the applause got more. And it was all, I felt that we were sort of, as I did after the days of George Floyd, when Black Lives Matter exploded across the world, I felt like there seemed to be like a rising in people's consciousness.
Yeah.
People seemed to be going, oh, hang on a minute, that was wrong. Everybody could see that was wrong. That moment was wrong. And there was injustice there. And everybody was like, I get it now. Oh my God, I get this thing.
That obviously isn't an experience that you grew up with. And the splits that you talk about, how did you start to navigate it as a child, as a teenager, through this sort of notion of assimilation you talk about in the book, where you're absorbing so much British culture that you almost, one way out of that dynamic is, well, I'm British. There's no, my colour is...
You completely quash all, for me anyway, that there wasn't sort of a black consciousness as, in a sense. I was fully in.
Yeah.
I think the assimilation process for me, was eating sausage and chips rather than curry goat and rice. Assimilating or associating with the comedians of the day, with the actors of the day, and sort of kind of associating with them. And that's me. I'm English. I'm British. But I think it's summed up in the book. When I go and see the Leeds United game, thinking, well, I'm a Leeds fan.
I can sit with them.
What a fucking idiot. A 9-year-old boy thinking I'm going to go and sit with a bunch of Leeds fans. And I remember walking to take my seat and just the cacophony of coon, nigger, wog. And I thought, I tried to ignore it, as you do. Try to ignore it, just go and take your seat and be strong. And then as I got closer to the seats, I thought, why the fuck do I want to go and sit with these people? And I span round and walked out and to Cheers. And that stayed with me. And I suddenly thought, as I say in the book, I think my black consciousness knew it was a stupid idea to go and sit with those guys. But I didn't know that side of myself. I hadn't had that conversation with myself. I denied myself that conversation because I was too busy assimilating. I'm British,
yeah.
I'm English.
One of the things that I think is great when you say it in the book is how in British society these issues are just not discussed. So you have these instances of racist abuse or the insidious nature of race and class as it exists in Britain. And yet all of this is internalized for people of colour. And it's normalised somehow so we can make sense of it to keep going. And it's just there and never is really dealt with, which...
It's tough.
Yeah.
And as I say, it is internalised. And I was saying this to my sister the other day, I'm speaking to her about the book. She hasn't read it yet, so I have to send her a copy. But she read the piece in the paper and she was like, we've not talked about this. And we've not talked about being chased as kids. We've not talked about what it was like to someone calling you. And I remember Afghanet and, Till Death Do Us Part. I remember hearing the word coon followed by canned laughter. And I'd sort of go, it was jarring for me because on the street, there was no canned laughter when someone called me a coon. There was just fear and anxiety and adrenaline running through my body and this tightening of, shit, who's called me that? From a passing car. Nigger! Calm down, walk home. Coon! And yet here I am at home hearing laughter. And it was very jarring.
When the father of an early girlfriend had a chat with you and said, the thing is,
mate,
your sort don't really go out with my daughter because, and this was what I found really fascinating, all sorts of things might start happening. And you describe it as that was one of the first experience of
nice racism.
Yes, the polite, the insidious sort of
Nice
British racism.
I always thought racism was a kind of aggressive, nasty, frightening experience, but there was an occasion when I dated my very first girlfriend when I saw a very different type of racism. It was from my white girlfriend's father, who at first refused to let me see her. But as I used to play for the school football team, one day he actually came to watch us play. And to my surprise, after the game, he invited me to the house. And I thought this was odd. So I kind of went along, and I'd never met the man before. But the mother invited me in, sat me down, and in he came in his work clothes. And he was very polite, very British and very English. And he went on to explain why I shouldn't necessarily be allowed to see his daughter. And he was, well, you know what I mean, man, just what I'm saying is, I like you. I mean, you're a nice bloke, but I just don't think you should be seeing my daughter because, anything could happen. All sorts of things could happen. What? You might have children. But he was convinced that some bizarre thing might befall him, some disaster might befall the family if I was allowed to see his daughter. So I kind of listened to this man for a couple of hours, endless cups of tea were made. And after that, I kind of went home. And the funny thing is, about a week afterwards, he completely changed his mind because he just sat there and thought, this is a really nice young man. And he let me see her. But again, we just bury all this stuff and we don't talk about it. And I think there's a lot of stuff that is in the book which every single black person that's read it has found it difficult because it's just not talked about. These are those, even mental health is not talked about in the black community. No. And when I did my the amount of older black people who stop me in Tesco's and go, well done, thank you. It just fills my heart really with joy because they know it exists. we know it exists, but it's hushed.
Yeah.
It's just not talked about. Dad's gone a bit funny. Dad's had a funny turn. Don't talk about it. We don't address it. And I think there are similar things, this racial trauma that we've had in this country, we've never dealt with it, and we've never talked about it. So for 10 years, throughout the 70s, walking to the shop was literally like the gauntlet. And I don't think those of us who did grow up in those days, the National Front were terrifying for me. So walking to school with NF sprayed on doors and walls and walking past that, it was a reminder. And the skinheads were a sort of physical reminder. Just, they would attack you on sight. On sight. You'd get off the bus, oh fuck, gone. And you wouldn't know why they're chasing you. You'd be running thinking, why do these guys hate me so much?
You say as well, when your dad also became unwell, and at the time they said it was hypomania, is how it was described. That was never explained either. Nobody said that your father had a mental health breakdown. But again, that was never talked about as to how that maybe happened. And you describe in the book that he himself didn't really talk much about his experience coming here.
No, he wouldn't. And
why do you think that is?
It's trauma. It's uncomfortable to talk about. I mean, I've experienced it myself when, after the George Floyd moment, in those early days when, you felt as if, it's really funny because, lots of white people, lots of famous white people were liking all my Instagram posts and liking all my tweets. All of them. Not one of them does now. But there was a sense that white people were getting it.
Yeah.
There was a sense that people were like, oh my God, I get this. I'm going to go buy this book and read, how do I miss this? There was a sense that people really started to understand. And for those 2 weeks, all of us felt very visible. And it was the minute someone talked about it, or the minute someone said, tell me what it was like, I found it really traumatic.
Yes.
Really traumatic. And I was inundated with calls from ITV, BBC to come on shows, to come and talk. And I turned every single one of them down. Because I know what's going to happen. It happened to Michael Holding when suddenly in the middle of test match cricket, someone's asking him about his experiences and he's there crying his eyes out. I didn't want to be that guy. Because it's trauma. You would never ask somebody who was molested as a child, tell us what it was like. You'd never ask somebody who'd had some awful experience as a child, tell us what it's like.
Your story is I guess, very interesting to people because you've lived your life. You had psychosis and you've carried on. You're examining it now. Why do you think you have been able to do this process, sit with those demons, examine them in a way that many other people perhaps wouldn't be able to? Post-traumatic growth is how you just describe the journey out of psychosis. You say it's probably been one of the biggest factors of your resilience and your honesty as an actor.
I think I describe it as it's shaken the bullshit from me. And I'm grateful for that. But I think had I not have done that documentary 2 years ago, I'd probably still be a little bit full of it. Or still not full of it, but I'd still not be quite as... I feel really quite free now and really quite relaxed.
What made you do the documentary?
Again, I actually thought it would be fun. I know, because there was, prior to the nightmarish delusions and hallucinations, there was at least 2-3 months of mania. And anybody who's bipolar knows this, that you can have incredible highs when you're incredibly creative. I know somebody who had a high, my stunt double in the last job that I just did, told me that during one of his highs, he just started painting. And somebody saw it, and within a month he had a fucking exhibition. And he's now an established painter. When he's having his lows, he locks himself in a room, gets loads of colours out, just fucking paints. And he's turned that into art. And I think that's extraordinary that you can do that.
So is the documentary a way to explore some of
me,
that
it was-
creativity again and the genesis of it? Or?
For me, I guess it was a way of exploring myself and trying to understand, inadvertently, I would say, as I said, because I didn't know what I was going to find. I thought I was going to find out some of the crazy things I did and some of the fun things I did. And so I thought I was going to find out more of that. But what I actually found was some really scary stuff. "30 years ago, I had a complete psychotic breakdown, and one of the things that happens with psychosis is you are subject to delusions and hallucinations, and at the height of my hallucinations and delusions, just as I was being sectioned and held down by 6 burly policemen, I was heard to say, 'I have to save the boy.' I was struggling against these policemen as I said, 'I have to save the boy.' 30 years later, I've worked out who that boy was. It was my younger self. Somehow in my confused, deluded state, I had become detached from that little boy. And over the years of acting and changing my voice, becoming a posh actor and not being a brummy, young black brummy boy, I had sort of lost touch with who I was, my core self, which was this young boy. 30 years later, I would say to myself, what would I say to that young boy? My therapist talks to me and says, how would you react to that young boy? Now, what would you say to him? And he encourages me to take that boy's hand, hold him tight, squeeze him, and look after him. Because if I don't, similar things might happen. So now, I like to think that I'm taking care of that boy, that I'm nurturing that boy, and I'm very much looking after him. So I thought I was going to find out more of that, but what I actually found was some really scary stuff.
All the things that had been hidden.
Yeah, or being sectioned. I completely forgot about what it was like being sectioned. And that's the most emotional part of the documentary for me, was when I go to the hospital and my friends reminded me just how ill I was. Being sat on by 6 policemen, waking up in a mental institution, just the loss of myself. I was completely gone, and I really buried that. I'd buried just how ill I was. So it was a real shock to me, and it was scary. But I think over the years, over that year, and thank fuck I got out of England, because I felt there was all the pressure from the press and people, and I got away to the States to carry on my work, and I was able to just compose myself a little. And then the book, and that's during during the documentary, I was given my medical notes. And the first thing I read was Merged Hearts with a Black Boy. Again, that took me right back to how race had literally driven a stake. The reality of race had just driven a stake into my heart. And how much of that I'd buried. So the envelope containing my medical records was like dynamite. And it sat on my shelf for 2 years. And opening that envelope is the basis of the book. Looking at really examining, because I was no longer scared, no longer in shock from discovering the truth. I discovered the truth, and now I wanted to understand it, really understand what had happened. So it was looking at all of the things I did in the hospital, all the things I said, the medication, and it was startling for me, really startling.
And you found that you're able to sit with the demons as you describe them, get to know them more. How did you, faced with all of these revelations that you found from the documentary, so much pain and trauma, what's the process of assimilating that back into yourself, I guess?
As I say, the book has helped me do that tremendously and knit it all together. I'm still surprised at how much it can slice through me. I mean, every now and again I get these waves of emotion that just wash in me. When you talk
about the fault lines?
Yeah, or trauma. You know, even answering questions like this, you know, here we go. Sometimes they just wash over me, and I can find myself getting disturbed or emotional, and I don't know where it's come from, and then it's gone. And I guess I'm sitting on top of this sort of, like sitting on top of a volcano. Every now and again it erupts, and then it quietens down again. So I don't quite know, you know, it's not like it has assimilated. I mean, I know it more, and as I say, it's a process, but it has the ability to slice me open.
I think the courage that you've had, not only delving into the roots of your psychosis, David, but also sharing that story with the world, so all those people who come up to you in the street who have not had that confirmation of their experience, you've given that to them. And is that something
I was really surprised by it and overwhelmed by it, because I didn't understand how common it is. It's really common.
Yeah.
I got off the train one time, this complete stranger ran up to me, old guy, white guy, shaking my hand. Thank you so much, thank you so much. I'm a psychiatrist. That's the one area of mental health nobody talks about. Thank you so much. Psychosis, thank you. And just walked off. And I gave a speech at the Royal Society of Psychiatrists, and really proud, actually. I've been awarded the President's Medal from the Royal College of Psychiatry, because nobody talks about psychosis. It's the one area that everyone's a little bit embarrassed about, or a little bit scared about, because you lose your mind. And there's that bloke off the telly, that bloke in Homeland has just been talking about it and did a documentary on it, and suddenly everyone's, oh, that's what happened to Dad. The days after the documentary, I was just so vulnerable, because people would stop me in the street and tell me their intimate secrets about their mum had a breakdown, their dad had a breakdown, their uncle had a breakdown, and be sobbing on the street with complete strangers, because it's really emotional, particularly for other people. You know, this wasn't just my experience, it was my mum's experience, it was my friend's experience. It must be like watching a loved one have dementia, just slowly disappear. It seems to have given people permission to talk about it. As you say, given people a language, rather than Dad's gone funny, or Dad went mad. It's Dad had psychosis, you know. And if there's one thing I'm proud of, I'm proud of that. And all of the mental health practitioners who are currently flooding my Twitter timeline all say, thank fuck, someone's demystifying it, destigmatizing it, allowing people to talk about it, because it happens so much.
You said earlier that the people in white society who are liking your tweets just after the murder of George Floyd don't tend to do that now. I mean, going forward, do you think that people see your role now as not only an actor, but someone more political? Is that how you see yourself? Is that what you sort of want to, you know, the voice and the following by talking about these issues that no one does? Is that something you want to take forward?
Here at the great Byline Times, so I've been invited by some body of people that I value, that I'll stop at those tweets and go, yeah, that makes perfect sense. You know, so being here, you know, is kind of an honor for me. It's great, because these are people I listen to. So I would hope that if there is a sort of a kind of political awakening, it's one that is with other people who I think make sense. It's speaking truth. It's speaking sense, because there is a lot of madness out there. A lot of disinformation out there, and a lot of people are convinced by that disinformation. So I'd say thank God that I've got this awakening, because I want to hopefully continue talking the kind of sense that either stops people from spinning out of control, or brings people slightly back in from the edge. So I hope there's a political awakening, but I'm not in a sort of flag waving right left. It's truth and sense.
David Harewood, it's been such a privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. I hope you found that as insightful and moving as we did. And there's a whole load more, an uncut version, nearly double the length, on our Patreon channel. By going there and supporting us, you can not only see that video with David at double the length, but a lot of our other uncut programs and our back catalogue of work. So if you want to support us and you want to know more, why not head over to patreon.com/Byline TV. There you can support us and help us continue our mission, as David says, to keep telling the truth. Next week, we'll be back to our more normal format. But until then, good night and have a great week.